Welcome to America Uncanceled. I'm Mercedes Schlepp, along with Matt Schlepp. And there's a lot going on in the news this week. President Joe Biden is visited Ukraine, now is in Poland. Well, President Trump is in East Palestine, Ohio. And then there's some updates on this Dominion case against Fox News that we want to get a couple updates from. Answering this and joining us today is Editor-in-Chief of Just the News, John Solomon. John, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, good to be with you.
And I hear you're going to be with us at CPAC as well.
I'm incredibly excited. It looks like an amazing lineup, 4 days of great political coverage. Can't wait to be there.
Yeah, it is going to be fantastic. I want to first talk about the news of the day. We know that President Biden visited with and met with Zelensky, President Zelensky from Ukraine, obviously saying that they're going to continue to provide the needed support that they need in Ukraine, and then off to Poland. While on the contrast, you're seeing former President Donald J. Trump, he actually left Mar-a-Lago and went over to Ohio to go check out for himself what happened with the train derailment and the environmental aftermath of that disaster. Give us your readout on, I know you talked to the President Donald J. Trump recently. Give us your readout on that.
Yeah, listen, I think it's left to President Joe Biden open to a very legitimate criticism that he puts Ukraine first, not America first. And the handling of the train wreck in Ohio has been an eyesore. From the moment it started, the administration just simply can't get it right. Pete Buttigieg has made all sorts of comments that have dug him into a hole. The EPA was slow to get on the ground and evaluate the toxic chemicals. It took a week for the Biden administration to even know what was on the train. It doesn't appear that the Biden administration was in the loop on the decision to do the controlled burn, which spewed some of these toxins into the air. So competence, this mirrors very similarly what we saw with the baby formula crisis a year ago. The Biden administration's incompetent, slow to react. And then when the time comes to let the people of Ohio know you care about them, that you're willing to show up and get things fixed, Joe Biden jets off to his globalist friend's favorite topic, Ukraine, the war in Russia. Very important issue. I'm not saying it isn't, but he isn't taking care of things at home, and it just gave a freebie to Donald Trump. And then when Donald Trump announced he was going last week, all of a sudden the Biden administration looked like the tail had wagged the dog, and they started getting involved in providing relief that they had failed to do for 2.5 weeks. Bad optics, bad politics, just bad presidential work. This is something that presidents usually get right. You have a tragedy on American soil, you know what to do. You guys are in the White House, you did it effectively for years.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of where I was going on this, which was, I know for Mercy with President Trump and for both of us when we worked for President Bush, when there was kind of like a crappy situation, that's when you call the vice president or the cabinet secretary and you say, look, you're going to have to spend some time down there. And what's weird is Joe Biden went to Ukraine, but yet Pete Buttigieg can be seen walking the streets of D.C. And not in Ohio. And it seems like a strange thing. John, can you recall, I can think of one thing in the Obama years which was similar, but can you recall a time when like the cabinet is so AWOL when things are exploding?
I can't, not in my reporting time. And the excuse, I think the most amazing moment was when Buttigieg said, well, train wrecks happen all the time. That's like telling the people during a catastrophic hurricane, well, hurricanes happen every year. If there's damage, if there are people suffering, if there are toxic things on the ground, a president should care and his team should be on the ground first and foremost and be there until the problem is solved. These guys were looking for excuses, and it was only Donald Trump shaming them into action that got them on the ball. And the people today, and if you listen to the people at East Palestine today, they're like, all we wanted was the governor to show up, and instead Donald Trump showed up. We're grateful for that. The people see the difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden.
So, you know, Mayor Pete, where was he mayor? South Bend, Indiana. It's actually a town that my wife and I are quite fond of, a great place filled with great people. But Mayor Pete's other excuse was, well, we had natural disasters all the time when I was a mayor. So it's like, the other thing is, hey, Ohio, why are you getting so worked up? These natural disasters, things happen, you just got to kind of take it and move on. It's like, well, this is a pretty serious one, and one where the Green Party, the environmental party, can't give good environmental answers. That's not a good position to be in.
It's not. No, it shows a lot of the hypocrisy in the Green movement. It sounds great, but it's less filling, right? They don't often live up to the promises that they make, and this is going to be a tough moment. I think this is going to resonate for a while. And keep in mind, it's only a few miles from Pennsylvania, another battleground state, and the Pennsylvania mayor isn't. The Pennsylvania governor is not too happy either. He's a Democrat. He's been saying some tough things, and then you have some major environmentalists, people like Aaron Brockovich, who said this response, the Biden administration's response, is why people don't trust government. Of course, she's famous for Love Canal, but when environmentalists are up speaking and Democratic governors are upset, you know Joe Biden blew this one.
So I got to ask you, because you wrote about this, calls for Secretary Buttigieg's resignation grows. Senator Marco Rubio wrote a letter basically saying that he's absent from, that Secretary Buttigieg, Pete Buttigieg, is absent from the job. I mean, I have to tell you, it makes no sense to me. I mean, I'm glad that the Republicans are standing up, because this is what the Democrats did constantly to the GOP candidate, cabinet members. So, you know, I'm glad that we are trying to highlight and put some pressure on the Biden administration to say, look, this leadership is not effective.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And listen, Pete Buttigieg has been absent AWOL for about a year. The whole airline crisis, which we saw through the summer, the fall, and then Pete Buttigieg went to, I got it, don't worry about the holidays. The holidays were an unmitigated travel disaster. Some people ended up losing a week of holiday time with the Southwest fiasco. He has not been present, and he hasn't been capable, and he hasn't been common sense on all of the crises that have been on his watch, and yet he keeps his job. You fail up in this town, apparently, and he's a perfect example of failing up. And I had Rick Grinnell on there, and he said, that's what happens when you make a diversity hire. And he said, you know, Rick Grinnell, who's openly gay, said, listen, I didn't get my job because openly gay. I got my job because I knew what I was doing in foreign policy. Pete Buttigieg doesn't know anything about transportation except he took a subway once. And I think that that frustration carries over. I'm hearing a lot more Democrats upset with Pete Buttigieg. That's a real problem for Biden.
There are no subways in South Bend, Indiana. I just want to make
That's right. That's a good point.
So
he probably didn't even do that.
I want to ask you about a story you also wrote that caught our eye. It was Key Dominion executive admitting company products riddled with bugs days before 2020 vote. This is what the Fox lawyers are saying. Obviously, there's a big case. It's a defamation case of the Dominion voting systems against Fox News. Walk us through what you learned in reading these filings.
Yeah, now this is the Fox lawyers' portrayal of it, so we want to wait till we see the actual evidence introduced in court. But they found emails and interviews and depositions where Dominion executives repeatedly said they had bugs leading into election. There was a bug in 2018 or 19 in which they're concerned that results could be changed by it, and so they have to jump on that quickly. There are some very colorful language of swear words and real-time contemporaneous emails where you see that Dominion, heading into an election, was concerned that its equipment and its software weren't up to snuff yet, and they were trying to stomp out, I think they used the word riddled with bugs just before the 2020 election. So you can see where Fox is headed, right? They're going to say, all right, yeah, a lot of people came on our show, made allegations that may not have been supported, but at the end of the day, there were legitimate reasons to question Dominion, and I think that they're beginning to lay their case. Of course, we want to hear Dominion's side of this as well, and we'll get that. But it reminds me of a story we did early on at Just the News back in 2020. It was from a FOIA that we got from Fulton County, Georgia, where a week or two before the 2020 election, Fulton County got an urgent warning from Dominion saying, hey, the size of the storage cards that collect the votes may not be big enough for the sort of turnout you're looking. You might reach a capacity. You may need to crack open your machines and put a new card in the middle of voting. That's a big shocker because that raises chain of custody issues. And Fulton County confirmed that memo came in. Dominion confirmed that they sent that memo. So you can see that the very tight story that Dominion gave, everything that we're always a game election software, well, maybe not. There are some issues here. It's going to be very interesting to see how Fox uses that during the trial, and also how Dominion responds to it.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And what's strange is I was just talking to a reporter today. Why does America have all these problems with their voting systems? You know, I think the Arizona example, you know, with the stuff I did in Nevada on all the fraud, it wasn't really machine-based. It was what we called garden variety fraud. It was like working the streets and returning ballots in a fraudulent way. But, you know, you look at Arizona, I've read where it's up to 30% of the precincts or machines didn't function on election day, the day that Republicans tend to vote. You know, if you read about this in third world countries or the undeveloped world, you'd be saying, okay, there's something hinky here. But like this keeps happening in America. John,
It just happened yesterday in Virginia. They had the special election, and I think it was Prince William County had problems with the ballots were the wrong size. I mean, we've been doing elections for 247 years. We know how to do this.
Right.
We seem to be losing our capability, and that's a real concern.
Not only that, but you would think in Arizona, one of the things that really drove me crazy is like, okay, you have a whole year to plan for this election or more, and the day of the election, these voting machines are not working. I mean, that's your sole responsibility is to get that done, and they just wash their hands of it, and I think it creates a lot of uncertainty, but yet the media doesn't let us even talk about this issue of election integrity, which is, I think, very frustrating.
It is, and it would be like the NFL not showing up for the Super Bowl or having the Super Bowl be a mess. The halftime show didn't get off, the refs didn't show up. I mean, these are some of the things that are happening in an industry where they plan for one day all year. It's part of the reason why I think President Trump, in the interview I did with him Monday, announced that he's changed his mind about early voting. We've got to play the early voting game. We can't leave things to risk on Election Day after what we saw in Arizona. Getting President Trump in the early voting game changes a lot of minds of people who've been suspect of it in the past. A major philosophical change by the president, but I think it's driven by the fact that we may not be able to trust the competency of election officials on Election Day only, so let's expand the field where it's legal to do so. I think that was a momentous moment this week that Republicans are going to play the mail-in and early game in an aggressive way, turn the tables on Democrats now.
Let's talk about one more topic here, which is that of, obviously, it seems like we're moving quickly into 2024 presidential election. Obviously we've seen Nikki Haley jump into the race, as well as Vivek, a young entrepreneur at about 37 years old. He also wants to jump he's jumping into the race as well. What's your sense as the field begins to grow? What's kind of your prediction as we move, especially into the summertime, which I think is going to be very telling of who's in, who's out?
There was a moment when Nikki Haley got in and President Trump, I think, really signaled what he thinks, which is the more the merrier, he said. That's very true. The larger the field is, the easier it is for Donald Trump to sew up the Republican nomination. So right now it's starting to look like a big field. I think you might see a Mike Pompeo, a Mike Pence jump in. Clearly Governor DeSantis is somebody a lot of people want to jump in. He hasn't exactly thrown his hat in the ring yet. But I think it's going to be a 6 to 10 person field for a while. Until the first primary is over, the money-raising primary, then a few people will win out. But the larger the field it is, the easier it is for Donald Trump and his base to come away with the primary victory. If it gets down to 2 quickly, then it's an interesting race, and it could be much closer. But you look at the latest polls, President Trump at 50, DeSantis at 30, everybody else in single digits. Donald Trump is still the commanding leader of the Republican Party heading into 2024. Nothing's changed that dynamic yet.
I agree, and the other thing is the weakness of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and these head-to-heads. There was a bunch of DeSantis polls that came out yesterday. There's been a ton of Trump polls, and it's part of the reason why I think Democrats are doing everything they can to back away from Biden. But can they actually back away from him if he's hell-bent on running? Can they deny him that renomination?
Well, they had this experience once in 1980 when Ted Kennedy thought maybe I could take out Jimmy Carter, and he couldn't, right? And I do think that when you look at this right now, the parallels to Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden are so many, whether it's foreign weakness, domestic inflation, and energy, all the things we're suffering through. But the Democratic Party finds itself in this problem, and an incumbent who doesn't want to get out of the way, even though he clearly potentially stands in the way of a Democratic victory in 2024. The parallels are really remarkable. And of course, that election gave us Ronald Reagan. So Republicans might have a lot of reason to be optimistic about the current situation. The other thing that's tough for Democrats is that they have a large number of seats to defend in states that are not easy to defend. What state just got so much bad news? Ohio. They've got a Democrat, Sherrod Brown, that's very vulnerable. Joe Biden is playing into Sherrod Trump's worst nightmare right now and what's going on in East Palestine. Not a good play by the Biden White House at all.
I would call Sherrod Brown dead man walking, John.
Oh, boy.
I don't see him pulling
especially
that race
Ohio's
out.
becoming such a red state. Let me ask you this. We're going into CPAC next week. What's your expectation? As we know, this is like I always say, like the big Super Bowl of conservatism.
It is.
What's your sense on what do you predict is going to happen? What's kind of the speech to look out for?
Listen, I think the biggest thing is a unity in the conservative movement that I haven't seen in a long time. People say, well, the primary is going to be divisive. That's fun. That's great stuff. there is a unity of what the Republican and conservative movement stands for now. And I think that the way Republicans in Congress came out of the fight over Kevin McCarthy and the way they've orchestrated the first 6 weeks of governance, they forced Democrats to take a lot of tough votes. And it's very clear what the American people are going to have as a choice in 2024. There isn't going to be three visions of the Republican Party. Republicans are clear where they stand on the border, on parents' rights, on the economy, on energy, and those are the issues that are almost certainly going to determine the next election. The Democrats are all over the map on those issues right now. And I think that the unity will be on display at the great conference you put together. There's a clarity of what conservatives stand for. We haven't, and it's clearly a Trump clarity. Just like Reagan dominated a generation of Republican and conservative thinking, Donald Trump's America First agenda, not Ukraine first, not the globalists first, is clear, and it creates a nice contrast for voters looking for change in 2024.
Yeah, well, I agree with you, John. The one thing I keep saying is that when Ron DeSantis goes out there and meets with cops and says he has their back and says we shouldn't be having all these woke policies in the big cities, I want to stand up and applaud him just as I do the Trump policies on these questions.
Totally.
He's not a big difference maker, though. The difference maker I see is the reemergence of the neocons. You know,
I think that's an interesting
idea that like
observation,
the global community and getting overly engaged in Ukraine, maybe even sending troops there. I think that is the real flashpoint in this presidential primary.
It is, and you saw Matt Gaetz pick a fight today that I think is very interesting, and that he's going to force a resolution vote on troops in Syria, saying it needs, that we've been there long enough that it requires a war powers declaration. Those are the sort of things that I think the America First Republicans can put on the table, probably win with, and remind people that, yeah, we're willing to fight tough wars when we have to, but we don't have to fight forever wars when there's no clear agenda. President Biden has yet to tell us what victory constitutes in Ukraine, and that's a dangerous place to be, not knowing what our end game is.
Well, John, we really appreciate you joining us today. We appreciate your great work, all the journalism. We look for more answers to the questions on what's going on in our elections. And Mercy and I, of course, are in the podcast world, and you can listen to America Uncanceled with Matt and Mercedes Schlaff wherever you get your podcasts. Also remember, CPAC starts next week. Can we believe it?
And we're still standing.
Go to cpac.org/DC. Do it now. Get your tickets. It's going to be full. We're going to have Donald Trump there. We're going to have Ted Cruz there.
We're going to have John Solomon, who's just joined us. It's going to be great.
We're going to have
Can't
Jim
wait.
Jordan there. It's going to be a great crowd. And more than anything else, we're also going to send the message that our nation's capital doesn't belong to the left. It's our capital, too, and we need to reclaim it. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you hopefully at CPAC. If not, we'll see you on virtual CPAC on this show.
Amen.